Good evening. Welcome to this special edition, the campaign season edition on this Tuesday night on Let's Talk Maywood on Diversity Today Media. I'm happy to join you as your host. I am Dr. Reggie Ratliff, and joining me on this special night is my co-host, co-laborer in the vineyard, and expert investment advisor, Terrence Hollisworth. Terry, how are you there?
Hello, Dr. Ratliff. Hello, let's talk Maywood.
All right. So we have an exciting show. We're going to bring back our very special guest, the Honorable Miguel Jones, who's a Village of Maywood trustee, who's running for re-election. And I'm excited about having him come back and join us.
Yeah, this is good stuff. I mean, couple things that I do well. Finance is one of them.
Sure.
Organizing, I've been pretty active in organizing, community organizing, and being involved with campaigns. And so this is a pretty exciting time of year because, one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we're voting and we're getting more people involved. And the to that extent, that's how we get our communities to be the way that we want them to be.
And this is a special time of year, as we mentioned. This is election season. Early voting has already begun. And, here as it relates to the Village of Maywood, myself being, raised in Maywood, family been in Maywood for, oh my goodness, over 50 years. We moved in Maywood in the early 1970s. And you being connected to Maywood for over the last 20 years or so. But there's a lot at stake. I mean, this is election season. And I understand we as African Americans don't like to become engaged with politics, but it's a necessity. It's necessary. You think about all the civil rights leaders and those organized community leaders, just going back years, decades and decades. The most popular being Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He wasn't involved in politics. He was a civil rights leader, but he had an impact, on the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and how there was an economic change with the Montgomery bus boycott. And he was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel because he was, protesting for laborers there in Tennessee, in Memphis. So we had Jesse Jackson, Bobby Rush. The list goes on and on and on about those who are not raised in the school of politics, but it was a necessary act because that's where policy changes. That's where laws change. And that's where equality changes.
So let me ask you this. Why do you think, especially young people, are not, they're not voting, they're not being involved with, the election process?
My brother, if I was young, I would have a better but I'm fitted for. I feel good. I feel young, you know what I'm saying? But the reality is I'm not young. So my conversations with my students, for example, they still have the same mantras. So some of us who were young at one time years ago to say, my voice, my vote don't matter. And that's very unfortunate because it feels like we're the only race that says that. And when you think about how in the early 1980s, when, Mayor Joe Freelon was the first African-American elected as the mayor of Village of Maywood, it was the Black people who made the difference. They went out there and voted. And so they were young, and so when you look at today, the turnout is like in Maywood, less than 20%. I just think it's just something that is taboo amongst our people, not just in Maywood, but nationwide. But like Ms. Connie Rao said, this election is just as important as, President Biden running for re-election. Maywood politics is very important. We are at the central of the Chicagoland area as it relates to the west suburbs, 10 minutes from downtown. And, Route 88 ain't that far. 294 isn't that far. Stevenson is not that far. So we have a lot of power. You think about Kimberly Lightford, the senior senator, she's from Maywood. You think about Karen Yarbrough. She has a position high in politics. She Maywood, and so you think about those people who have passed through Maywood by living in Maywood, and there aren't that many followers that's willing to take that mantle. Chris Welch. How can I forget Christopher Emmanuel Welch? He's not from Maywood, but he's from Proviso Township. So he's kinfolk. And so
Hmm.
you think the young people would lead that. I think really we need to teach our people our history, because if you don't know where you come from, you won't know where you're going.
Hmm.
And that's what my grandfather used to always say: know your history, because there's history, then there's his story. We want to make history.
So this is the thing that I'm interested in hearing with Trustee Jones. He's a young politician. I don't know if he calls himself a politician or not, but
Hmm.
he's assuming the office, right?
Right.
And we have had this, 400 plus years of, really the politics of our of the black community has all been about education. And so when I hear Trustee Jones starts talking about economic inclusion and economic development,
Hmm.
that's right down my alley, because
Yeah.
what I know is at the end of the day, um, everybody wants to make money. They want to feel financially independent, and a lot of that has to do with what goes on in our neighborhoods. That a lot of it has
Hmm.
to do with um, access to housing and things like this. And so I'm going to get out of the way because nobody wants to hear me. But let's talk to Trustee Jones and let's talk politics.
Sounds good, my brother. I will see you soon. And I want to bring on our returning guest. His name is the Honorable, because that brother's a politician. He's doing great things in the village of Maywood. He is young, and he's running for reelection. Miguel Jones, the Honorable Trustee Miguel Jones. He is from Maywood. He was raised on 12th Avenue. He attended Washington Elementary School. He also attended Walter Lutheran High School in Merles Park. He was a student athlete, graduate of Illinois State University, and former chapter president of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. I mean, he's so much engaged, so I would not go through his whole litany of accomplishments, but certainly this young brother is well accomplished, and he's doing great things for the village of Maywood and for our young people in particular. So, without further ado, I'd like to bring on village trustee Miguel Jones. Trustee Jones, how are you doing this evening?
I am doing great. Dr. Ratliff is good to be on. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back. And we're reaching a critical stage, not only for the year of politics, but and certainly in terms of leadership in the village of Maywood. And so this campaign season kind of sets the tone, right?
Absolutely. Maywood is on the dawn of a new day in terms of leadership. There's I would say, younger uh, individuals getting involved in comparison to, what we've had on the board traditionally, a lot of millennials. We're also at a, very interesting time in the economy, and there's just a lot of things going on. And, there's COVID, and, there's mental health, and there's infrastructure. And so you pile all that on, and then you really get a nice gumbo of obstacles, but opportunities that you have to face. So that's something that I'm interested in adding value. I believe I have the background to add value, and the experience, and the relationships that it needs in order to know how to maneuver in
Mm-hmm.
this space.
Before you came on, Trustee Jones, Terry was asking me about the challenges of our young people becoming involved. You just mentioned about millennials being engaged in the village of Maywood, but yet our voter turnout in the village of Maywood, in particular amongst our African American people, is below 20%, and yet we hear a lot of complaints about leadership and things of that nature. Some of it is hearsay, not doing research, just hear what somebody else says, and they just tag along. But some of it is legit. So, with that said, you're running on a slate. How do you, as a young African American male who is already serving and running for reelection, what kind of platform do we need to set to reach out and engage the young people and to bring them to the fold?
Well, that's a great question. It's it's challenging just because really you want to meet the kids where they are. So, that's going to be at the, park districts, at our parks, at the schools, sometimes at home, at community events. But first you have to just try to figure out how to naturally engage. On the campaign trail, specifically, you knock on doors or you host fundraisers or what have you. But when it comes to the youth, we have to create the environment in which they can have safe fun, and then also look for the kids that are old enough to work. Look to have programs and such, which we do. The park district and the village, we have teamed up to put together different youth initiatives, but we have to do a better job marketing them. We have to do a better job at making sure that they're inclusive of all of our kids. We have a very diverse community. Maywood is don't quote me on this, but let's say it's about 45% Black, 45% Hispanic, and then maybe 10% other ethnicities. So we have to make sure that we're also that we're marketing and getting the message out to all of our residents so they can receive it, and just be intentional about it. I think that's all we got to do. We got to be intentional, and then lean on our partners. Our other organizations like the park districts, like the library boards. It's meant to delegate that task as well. The resident, needs to have a full suite type of experience when it comes to the village, where it doesn't really matter who's the governing body, but you should be able to seamlessly be able to get information that's helpful to them.
I love the answer, because we just spoke with the new director of the library, the Maywood Public Library. We love his vision, and we love how one of his first acts is to be engaged with the community, have community forums and things like that. You mentioned the park district; they have fairly new leadership, right? Who's trying to make some changes or restructuring, if you will, some improvements. And so collaboration is what it sounds like. And that's always been your platform. I mean, you've always partnered, collaborated, not just within the village, but also River Forest, for example, and then with the mayors of local areas, the Tour de Proviso. I think I'm saying that right.
Yep.
But these are, astonishing things that you're doing, a great vision that's necessary. So do your colleagues that's on the same ticket as yourself, do they share that vision to work with the youth and just the community at large? Let's talk about that for a moment.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'll speak about the slate that I'm running on. So I'm running under the People's Choice Party. It includes myself, Trustee Isaiah Brandon, who's a 2-term incumbent, and then Miss Rachel Montgomery. So yeah, I think I see a flyer here. Yeah, so we do.
Yes.
Have, I appreciate that. So we do have an opportunity to connect tomorrow at 6:30. It's open, to the community. It's also on our Facebook group page. But feel free to come on out and ask us questions about what our vision is, and we can ask you, questions about what we could do to build the relationship between the residents and the elected officials. But yeah, I mean, we do share the same plan, and part of it is understanding the board dynamic in Maywood, and it's split, if you will. And I think depending on your philosophies, you want to have a lot of diversity, and you want to make sure that you're encouraging a setup where everyone needs to communicate in order to get to the not just a solution, but the right solution. And so I think balance is needed. And I believe, Rachel can bring that. But, and then also, I think it'll put, our other elected officials in a position to make sure that we're really, again, vetting ideas and, working together to come to the correct solutions.
Wonderful. Trustee Jones, I am familiar with who Isaiah Brandon is. You mentioned Trustee Brandon being a 2-termer, and yourself. This is going to be you're pursuing your 2nd term. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. But I don't know much about Rachel Montgomery, and I'm not sure if the village know who she is and as a whole. So can you talk a little bit about her, who she is, her background, and what's her vision is?
Yeah, sure. So Rachel is a product of the community. Went to grammar school here as a graduate. I believe she's class of 06, if I'm not mistaken, from Proviso East. So she's a mother, homeowner, also a business owner, as well as working in corporate America in the food industry. And so I think that's the experience that she has on the sales side and working with the food industry. I think she could bring a unique lens to the board in terms of getting to the bottom of our inability to have secured a grocery store or get access to fresh produce. I think that's something that we like to get some experience on, and then that sales component. You have to always know how to sell your community and what that presentation looks like and what the formatting and what the pitch is. That type of insight helps on governing bodies. So those are a couple things about it. Of course, there is another event that that CSPL is hosting on I believe the 23rd, which is Thursday, where all the candidates will be at. And so it might be a good opportunity to come out and meet her. We definitely encourage that, and all of us.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if Terry has your contact information, but we certainly want to share your contact information if any of the constituents have any questions about the events, upcoming events, and things like that. So I want to make sure we get that from you before we sign off.
Okay. Great.
So you mentioned Madam Montgomery running with a sales and food background. Maywood is a food desert, so it's certainly something that's in order. And I also know that the last comprehensive plan for Maywood was about 10 years ago, right? 2013.
Yeah, the last official update, to my knowledge, was definitely in the 20 teens, but I believe 2013 sounds correct.
So, as a person who grew up in Maywood, used to having, A&P, White Way, those, may not have been top of the line food store, but we did have grocery stores. To know that Maywood is a food desert when it's certainly not a poor community at all, it's kind of disheartening. So I guess my question is, as you and your colleagues are, Terry said Audi was the best. I don't know about that. Not 10 years ago. They just maybe last 5 years, but nonetheless, is there going to be another comprehensive plan, Trustee Jones, to kind of identify these lack of resources for the citizens of Maywood, not just for youth and having equality, for our population, but resources like grocery stores?
Yeah, so the comprehensive plan is always intended to be a living, breathing document. And what I mean by that is that we're always updating it, and we're always, at least should be looking at it, because things change and society changes, and you always want to be reviewing your plans and updating it accordingly. But, I think although that does need to be reviewed, I think the village should focus more on a strategic plan, a strategic initiative that thinks, 10 years or 15 years out, and phases out our economic plan, and then where we can benchmark things and assess how well we're doing. I think that is, and coupled with utilizing the comprehensive plan to make sure, to use that as a guide to make sure that we're going forward, keeping the character of Maywood and understanding the history. I think that needs to be the approach. And you do that by leaning on your partners from the community, such as like the Maywood Chamber of Commerce. You have conversations with organizations that have the experience to be able to give you the nuance to some of those things and give you the feedback. I even think about, Kroger has a distribution company in the village of Maywood. We have to utilize that partnership to say, okay, you guys have the insight into, what the criteria is for these, larger corporations and what they're looking for and their footprint. They have footprints analysis where they put in data about, average household income and, what type of stores are, within the region. So, we also have to make sure that we get, people at the table that can ensure that we're connecting with the right people, that we're giving our best speech, and that, we're putting our best foot forward, and development will come. And because Maywood is so fortunate to be prime real estate. I mean, that's always going to be Maywood's saving grace at the end of the day. It's prime real estate, and if you know anything about real estate, that's always going to be high value.
Absolutely.
Now, sometimes your prime real estate isn't in the best of condition, but that doesn't take away from the equity that's really sitting in there. And Maywood has such a huge capacity to thrive, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here now.
Absolutely. Someone posed a question, Trustee Jones, about you mentioned character of Maywood. They want to know if you can elaborate on that. Does that mean like the identity of Maywood, or what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, the character. So Maywood is a suburb, right off the Des Plaines River, and we have a lot of trees, and we have a lot of historic homes, and we have brick roads, particularly on the north end. And we have the childhood home of Chairman Fred Hampton on 17th, and we have the Underground Railroad on Lake Street.
Yeah.
We have the Doc Rivers Family Basketball Court, also known as 10th Park, right here on Washington Boulevard.
Don't forget Winfield Scott on 17th.
Winfield Scott, Connor Heiss. All these things that have narratives to them, very important narratives that are important to the community, and just our diversity in general, the way our homes are.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean about the culture and the brand, and then of course the history, the people.
Yeah.
I shared that I went to the Proviso East all alumni picnic last year, and I didn't attend Proviso East, but one of the things that I noticed and I observed is you had individuals that were going back as far as I think there was the 1950s were there, which was amazing to see. But those were mostly white people.
Yeah.
And then you started to see it transition into the 60s, into the 60s and the 70s, and then now what our community looks like now. It's very diverse. But it's primarily Black and Hispanic. So that's the story and the culture that you don't want to lose insight on, because that's your brand effectively, and how people feel about your community.
Thank you for taking a deeper dive with that question and just answering in more detail. So let's talk about your accomplishments as trustee in your first term. Certainly I have some in writing, but it's better to hear from the source. There's some things that's been happening, some monies that came into the village that's been used to help out with some of the roads and things like that. The old senior home in Maywood, I think it's on 4th Avenue. Talk about your involvement in the transition and transactions taking place in the village.
Yeah, so to be honest with you, this new administration has been involved, but some of these projects have been championed by other individuals. I think of Mayor Edwina Perkins. I think about our state rep, Chris Welch and Kimberly Lightford and Congressman Davis. These are things that they have been advocating for a very long time. And so, I'm kind of coming in on the tail end, shepherding those things and making sure that they're executed properly. But, a lot of the grunt work, Washington Boulevard, even, that's something, that has been vouched for a long time. The unique position that we're in now is that we did have the infrastructure bill that passed at the federal level that created resources. That's why government is important. People advocating for those type of things. We do have the Speaker of the House that is from the community and from our region, and is very intentional about looking to support us in any way that he can and advocating for us. So those things are starting to come into fruition. Why it's really important when you have these opportunities that you have the right people in place to shepherd these things so they positively impact the community as a whole.
Absolutely. And you're speaking of the Speaker of the House, Christopher Welch, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'm glad that you were humble enough to not take credit for the things that's happening. You admitted you're being transparent to saying, hey, I was not involved in the beginning, but I made sure in my role that these transactions were executed appropriately. So, honor is better than being dishonest. So I'll just put it like that. So you mentioned that there's some events taking place with your the candidates. Where do you see the three of you moving in terms of keeping this going um, once the election is over? And say the three of you win, whether it's two of you, just yourself. What's the next steps after the election?
Yeah, so the two priorities are one, it would be focusing on getting and hiring a permanent village manager. It's really hard to do things like comprehensive plans and strategic initiatives when you don't have one of your top leaders at the table as a sounding board to making sure that what you're saying, like what's the operational side of that? What is the funding side of that?
Yeah.
Because, we serve as legislators, but then our village manager, manages the day-to-day operations, the execution of those services. And so to have that cohesion is critical. So that'd be priority number one. Two would be related to our ARPA resources. So we did receive a grant, like many other communities, the American Rescue Plan Act. We did receive funds that were assigned to us from the federal government to be used as a mechanism to recover from COVID.
Right.
So there are allowable uses for it, and we want to be strategic about how we utilize those resources. So we're proposing using half of that $3.1 million that we have been allocated to certain areas of the community. To name some specifics, so one would be, teaming up with the Maywood Chamber of Commerce to come up with a small business economic just initiative. I mean, it's just going to be a whole initiative in order to support our current businesses, but also encourage new businesses in the community. There's going to be a senior program within this proposal that will lean on the already current proviso handyman program, but we're going to utilize resources to scale it and be able to offer things that are typically outside their scope. But we want to do that for, our most vulnerable residents, so our seniors, folks that, might be having some trouble. And there's, some health and safety issues that we can help them address, like porches, for instance. Make sure fire alarms are updated and leaky toilets and all that type of thing. We're going to be looking to make some progress on that. And then, lastly, I would say is public safety is another one. Our Chief Willis has been away for, quite a few months now on military duty. Okay. And so our deputy chief, which, Chief Yancey's doing a great job. It's also a lot of pressure on him because now he's doing, multiple roles, and we need our public safety to be at top notch. So something else where that conversation has to continue, and we have to get very creative in our solutions. And then one other program that we wanted to lean on that will help in terms of public safety was with Ring Doorbell. So the initiative would be, eligible residents would be able to get some sort of resources toward them getting their own Ring doorbell.
Nice.
But we really want to encourage that in some of our, I would consider some of our troubled areas. We want to get surveillance in that area, but we also want to help the homeowner as well, that can watch over their own home and packages being stolen. And if it was, carjackings and those type of things. So we're going to come up with something that makes sense. I think something that we could also tie in there is, in the event, let's say a crime does happen, that, you'd be willing for us to also look at the, look at those recordings. So being able to leverage this where it's a win-win for the community, but we're investing in the community as well.
That's excellent to know, especially as they're addressed to the senior population, because there's certainly a need there. And I know that Mr. Larry Shapiro has been very much involved with making sure that the seniors have access to resources and taking care of things of that nature. You mentioned half of 3.1 million. I think if my math serves, that's 1.5, right?
Correct. That's what we're proposing this fiscal year that starts in May, that we'd like to start to invest in some of these areas and work with our partners to come up with the criteria necessary for this to get into the right hands and to impact the community effectively.
What about the other 1.5 million?
So, that right now we're, still vetting. There is some infrastructure and capital related expenses that we want to vet more. And you also want to, leave reserves on the side for potential matching grants, for instance. So you also want to have resources available because a lot of grants that you receive, there are requirements that might call for you to match or even front those resources. But if you can do that for a particular project, then, it's important if you can have that available, and then you're, getting more bang for your buck because usually you're going to have grant funding to help either reimburse you or supplement those things.
What about any of those funds being allocated for strategic planning? Is that possible, as you mentioned a couple times, for the village?
Absolutely. Well, we would have to confirm that it is one of the allowable uses, but the categories are broad enough, and I definitely think strategic planning, especially now in person, would be important and get the community involved. Because I think that's where Maywood, one of the unspoken opportunities is really capturing what our brand is and leaning into it, really leaning into who we are. And, I think it helps calm the noise of some of the other stuff is when you have a strong focus on, what you do in your community and all the things that you're doing well. So the strategic plan would be one of those ways in that you engage the community into, getting that down and documenting it.
One other question, Trustee Jones, and thank you again for taking time to come on during this busy time of season, I'm sure. What about the high taxes in Maywood? I know there's still, empty lots, boarded up homes and, things like that. And in terms of taxes, property taxes in particular, has that, or will that be addressed in the near future as it relates to that?
Yeah, I think Maywood or just Cook County in general has a tax problem. The situation in Maywood, I think, it's a lot of moving parts. I think there's a combination of low tax collection. So although you give someone a property tax bill, does not mean it's always paid. And I know Maywood is, one of the percentage-wise, one of the lowest performing communities in the state in terms of collection. I believe we're in the mid 80% range in terms of that. So, when you think about a $50 million budget, you're talking, $7-8 million, and that's impactful. That's cutting at the margins of things, and that, stops growth. So there has to be a focus on that, getting properties on the tax roll, and then also working with the Cook County Assessor's Office to understand and ensure that we're getting assessed equitably, amongst the other, from a regional perspective as well, from a comp perspective, that we're, that it's making sense. So I think it's that. I think it also has to do with, the blight and, as far as, not having, a strong retail space as well. That also takes a lot of pressure off the residents. So again, that's why you need that strategic plan to address what those things are, and then you manage it. And but you got to bring the experts to the table, right? That's one of those things. If one person could do it, I promise you, it would have been done before. It would have one person would have stepped in and done it. It's just not that simple,
right?
It has to be all hands on deck, well thought out approach in order to really address these things.
I wanted to ask you, and it's just little off topic, but you mentioned the village manager runs the day to day, and that's how it was set up, and that's how it is today. Why isn't there a full-time mayor in the village of Maywood? Is that something that's ever been addressed? I mean, I would think that although the mayor may make the final decision, I presume, the village manager seems to be the president of the village. So why isn't it the other way? Well, village manager notwithstanding, running the day to day, but why isn't the mayor more engaged as far as time is concerned?
Yeah, so I guess a little bit about Maywood history. Once upon a time, Maywood did have a strong mayor form of government. So there's several forms of governments, right?
Yes.
Um, Maywood in particular is in a village manager form of government or a council manager form of government.
Right.
Communities such as like the city of Chicago or some of our other neighboring towns, they have strong mayor or strong mayor forms of government, and so that kind of changes how things work. But historically, I think up until about the 60s or 70s, Maywood had a strong mayor. And at that time, and I can't think of his name at the moment, but I have met him before a couple times, and he'll share a story that it was a young guy in the role, very inexperienced. He came in, he ran a pretty good campaign and won, but just was ill prepared, and things in the on the administrative side just went down really bad. People weren't coming to work. It was not Freeline. It was before Mayor Freeline, but things happened where the village decided to step in. Long story short, and change the form of government by referendum. And Micro May wrote a piece about it, and maybe I can share it on my page again about the history. But that's the reason, is that the community did not want to risk giving someone not experience the ability to run a 40-50 million dollar organization. And so it can has its strengths, but some of the weaknesses is that can happen because you can ultimately elect anyone that's eligible and that decides to participate. So the idea was to hire a third party, nonpartisan professional to run the day-to-day operation, and then it kind of removed that operational role from the governing body, and just made us purely a legislative part of the government.
Okay. Well, I know Maywood isn't the only village, manager run in the suburbs. So I know there are others in the west suburbs and throughout the suburbs of Chicago. But I was just curious if it was time for that. But I'm glad you get that background information. And as we close this podcast, Trustee Jones, I wanted to know if there's anything that we omitted discussion about that you'd like to bring up, that you would like your constituents to know as we're in the midst of this campaign season.
Yeah, I would just encourage the residents to know that, particularly in Maywood, we're in a very unique position to take advantage of some opportunities that are going to be coming in from the state and federal level, and really utilizing our those opportunities to improve our community. And it's important that the residents have the best and brightest and the most experienced leaders in those seats to build the relationships that it takes that's necessary in order to improve your community. And so I just want to encourage the residents to participate in the election. Of course, I would love to have your vote, and I would love for you to support my two running mates, Trustee Isaiah Brandon and Rachel Montgomery. But in general, I just want you to vote. There is power in numbers. The state and federal, governments and legislators are very well aware of communities that participate in the democratic process, and so it's just important that our numbers improve, so we can, leverage our voice and get things done. But ultimately, I would just leave, the residents with, since I've been a trustee, I've seen some good leadership, and I've seen some horrible, leadership. And I think it's important that you have experienced people that know how to be professional and that know how to get the job done, are always at the table, right? You want to have different minds at the table. And so, I think we're some of those unique minds that are going to push the envelope to think creatively to solve solutions in this community. And I hope to get their support on April 4th.
Fantastic. Well, Trustee Jones, it was an honor having you on the podcast. You could come on anytime, and I'm glad you came back to talk about an important part of Maywood's present, which is the campaign season. which will become history after April 4th. So great closing words for our audience and for your constituents. And I would like to thank everyone who tuned into this podcast. It was a joy having you. Please get out and vote. Early election voting is taking place right now. And then voting day is on April 4th. Come out, come strong with your friends, families, those who are able to vote. Please make sure you're doing so to do the best you can to bring them out, because we need you to vote to build a better Maywood. I'd like to thank Trustee Miguel Jones on behalf of the People's Choice Party, along with Isaiah Brandon and Rachel Montgomery. I am Dr. Reggie Ratliff. Like us on Facebook and tune in to us by subscription on YouTube. And until next time, we'll be bringing on our next phenomenal guest. God bless you. Be safe, vote, and good night.